If you are new to our channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Everybody wants to compost, and it's something that people feel is a difficult thing to do. People think you have to have a big pile in the backyard or the back 40, and if you're in an urban lot or a small place, you can't do that, and that's simply not the case.
No, and there's ways you can compost even in like an apartment.
Well, right, and there's a number of different types. It's not just put it in a pile and walk away. There's different levels and different types of composting, and we're going to cover some of those because I just don't want people to think if I don't have a big backyard or a field, I can't compost.
Right, and if you live in a situation where you're afraid that raccoons or other wildlife might get to your compost, you can make a compost an enclosed compost bin. Or obviously you can buy one as well. But either way, you have that option. But you want to think about what you're putting in your compost. So there's a few things you can put in there: yard trimmings, food waste. So food waste would exclude anything but like dairy, meats, or bones.
Now, with that being said, you could put that in your compost pile if you had it way back out next to the woods in the back.
Right, and you're like back 40. Right. But I'm talking about urban composting here. So that's definitely what you want to think
and the
about
reason why is those will
compost.
break down. It will take time, but those will break down. But the thing is, you're going to attract animals. That's what we're avoiding by not including cheeses and greases and bones and meat. We're wanting to avoid those critters that we don't want in the compost pile disturbing it. So let's talk about really the list, and that's the list of what you can't put in your compost pile is far smaller than the list of things you can put in your pile. But there's two different types of piles, and we talked about this with Michelle Ball a couple of weeks ago. There's a cold compost process and a hot compost process.
Right. So if you're doing cold compost, that's when you just take a combination of whatever you have, whether it be food waste, yard trimmings. You could even put like newspaper in there. Anything that is going to kind of break down. You could do a cold compost process, and you just keep adding to it. Just keep adding to the heap, and then as you can kind of turn it over occasionally if you want, and it kind of breaks down over time. Hot composting is a more active process. It's a more chemically aerobic process where you're taking a combination of the nitrogen, which is
natural chemicals, not like man-made poured in. It's the
the arobic chemical process is it's a chemistry term.
With the oxygen.
Right. So you have this process, and so you're mixing nitrogen, which are the greens, which are things like grass clippings, food waste are two major greens, any sort of weeds.
Coffee grounds. Those are all nitrogen-based in the compost world. And then you have the carbon, which are the browns. So that's things like twigs, leaves, shredded paper, dry material.
Like more dry material. That's a carbon. So you have the combination of the two, and those work together to help break each other down and that's a hot compost.
And your temperatures will get internally up to 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's perfect, and that speeds up the process. The advantage to the hot compost rather than the cold compost is whatever you add into that compost pile, let's say you're weeding and the weeds have seed pods on them, those seed pods will be burnt or will bake in that compost pile where the germination is no longer viable. If you just continue to add the grass clip or the weed seeds and all that stuff into your and like pumpkin seeds or melon seeds or whatever, you throw the whole thing in there on a cold compost, those seeds are still viable. So they may break down to a soil base and a small, it looks like soil, but you introduce that into your containers or your garden, you got a bunch of weed seeds coming up. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, the ideal size of a compost pile is 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, 1 cubic yard. Mm-hmm. Now, we all don't have that availability. So whatever size you can make, larger, the more material, and the more it's going to heat up if you're going to do the hot compost method, the quicker it will break down. Some people can make compost in about 14, 21 days because they're on this. This is what they do in some instances. And other people will add alcohol to it, like a beer, to stimulate the microbial life in it to speed up even quicker. But maybe we just want to put a pile in the backyard nicely. Maybe make a little corral, a little pin for it, a little pile of it, and it'll break down in a couple of years because you just don't feel comfortable or you don't want to throw your tomato peels or your cucumber scraps, whatever, in the garbage because eventually this will break down. You can feed your soil. There are two other methods in which you don't even need a compost pile, but you do need some land. It's called trench or pit composting, which means you have the fresh scraps of vegetables or coffee grounds or fill in the blank. You go out in the garden or even the yard and you dig a ditch, essentially. Layer that in there, a nice layer. Let's say you have a 2-foot ditch by 6 inches. You move that sod back, go down about 6 inches, put that material in there, put the sod and soil back on top of it, and it breaks down, it disappears, it feeds the soil. So you can also do that with your garden too, but you want to strategically place that in positions in which you're not growing this year, because that does heat up in the ground and you can burn your roots. But you can remember, okay, this was the place where I did the trench composting or pit composting this year, so next year it'll be nice and fertile and I can put my plants in that area. But again, it may not heat up to the temperature in which those seeds will be killed that you're putting in the ground. Now,
right,
peels, scraps, that type of thing, you're not going to worry. If you're putting physical seeds in the ground, you want to keep that in mind.
And there's different compost accelerators, I guess you could call them,
yes,
that, on the market, where it speeds up your compost process. I think it's kind of pricey, isn't it?
Yeah, if you want to accelerate, there's plenty of ways online to do it organically, affordably, to speed it up if you're wanting that return of that compost for your garden very, very quickly.
Right. So there's that option too. So then there's vermiposting,
right,
which is something you can actually do in like a Rubbermaid bin.
Right.
With
there's
worms.
Some construction that goes along
with it. You do have to get worms for that. And
reg wigglers are what you want,
yeah.
not backyard worms. No,
not your backyard worms.
Right.
And there's many different instructions online for that as well.
The essential concept here is you have a bin, you put the red wigglers in, you put food scraps on the top or mix it in a little bit, and over a course of a week or two they will break this down, they'll eat it up, and they will create what is called worm castings, or their manure, which is very, very good for your garden or your containers or your pots in the house.
And I just want to mention, you might not think worms produce a lot of manure, but one single worm can produce up to 1/3 pound of their own waste a year.
Right.
So that's not bad for a tiny little worm.
And you don't have to worry about, once the worms get to they understand their community inside that bin, and once they get to a population level that is
too much
or close to too much, they will stop reproducing. So you don't have to worry about, I've got too many worms, I got to create another bin. Now, if you take a whole bunch of worms out of that bin and put in another bin, they will begin reproducing and fill that bin up as well. But it's a great way to, it's a great kids project as well, and there's ways of removing those castings.
It's ideal, say, if you live in an apartment or something and you want to compost,
yes,
and you have like a little patio garden.
It doesn't smell either, by the way.
No, and maybe you have like a little patio garden, you're like, I would love to have my own compost. This is a good option.
And there are large industrial size worm composting facilities because they sell the worm castings. They have that going on all the time. And if you do have your own compost pile, we'll end on this note, you do not want to put your cat or dog feces in that because they have pathogens that are harmful. So you don't want to compost that manure. There are other animals in which that manure can be composted or directly applied to the garden or your containers, but dog and cat, you don't want to do that because it can lead to problems with your health as well. So that's just a small snippet of composting on Big and Small. Checking out the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener radio show. For more, go to the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com for full-length in-studio video and podcast replay of Season 1. Season 2 underway and added weekly. Tweet us at TWVG Show or hashtag TWVG to be part of the program.